Hey, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the RUCKCast. Before we get going on today's episode, I wanted to let you guys know that I went ahead and I enabled the ability to text the show from the podcast app. So if you're listening to this as a normal podcast because you don't like looking at me, and I have a guest today, and you probably don't want to look at either one of us. So, yeah, go listen to it on the podcast app. And then when you're done listening to us on the podcast app, for each episode, there's a link where you can click it, and it'll allow you to text the show. Now, I get those. It's anonymous unless you put your name, and that way you can give me feedback that way. So going forward, you can now text the show. Kind of cool. Found it the other day. Said, why not enable it? What's the worst thing that can happen? Now that I say that out loud, probably there's a lot of bad things, but we're going to go with it anyway. But for today's episode, I went and found a friend of mine because he's kind of like me. And when him and I get together, it's a little scary. And so I wanted to talk about some different things that him and I sort of specialize in sometimes. And so for this one, I'm calling this episode the Rule Breakers because it's all about rules that we have that sometimes we know to follow, sometimes we don't know to follow, sometimes we know we should follow them and we break them anyway, and all these other things. And I was like, if there's going to be somebody that's going to talk to me about breaking rules, I wanted it to be my guest. And so, without further ado, I want to bring on my friend Aaron here. So, Aaron, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody, and then we'll get talking.
Hey everyone, my name's Aaron Lee. I'm a senior manager of systems engineering at Ruckus for MDU multi-dwelling units, multifamily. I'm a network engineer, more or less, probably on the wired side at heart, but I've had to work in Wi-Fi probably ever since I began that. And I think it's all all got to be put together, right? And you all got to figure out how to work it.
Yeah, it's funny. I saw something on LinkedIn the other day, and it was like, oh, everything that it takes to be a wireless engineer. And I looked at it and I was like, well, that cannot be a wireless engineer that they're depicting. It was like that AI art stuff because I
Yeah,
was like, they only had one cable, and I was like, oh no, no, no. Like wireless engineers have more cables than we do anything else.
it's just one
So
cable. They don't worry about anything behind it either, like the
right,
switching or anything like that. It just works. It's all wireless.
it's it's yeah. Well, it's the old Dilbert cartoon. How hard can it be to not install wires?
Yep. No.
So Aaron, thank you for joining. And I thought of you because every time we talk, we always end up sort of segueing and de-evolving into like just things that drive us nuts, things that we found, things that all this stuff. And so when I was thinking of this episode, like I said in the intro, I was like, there's nobody else I really want to have this conversation with about breaking the rules than you. So hopefully,
I mean, the name of it definitely scared me when I first looked at it. I was like, oh, okay. I was like, Jim about to get me in trouble. But no,
well,
yeah,
and that's a fair statement because it's not like I'm known for like always following the rules and known for doing all this other stuff. I'm generally known for doing kind of my own thing. So you had every right to be concerned. So even with those concerns, thank you for joining us. And I'll be honest with everybody, I didn't realize Aaron was a wired guy until earlier today when he was talking to me, and he's like I'm kind of a wired guy, and I was like, oh, that's bad because now I have another wired person I can go ask questions to. He didn't. You really had no idea what you're setting yourself up for.
it's good. It's good. It's good. This is what I do.
Okay, so I'm gonna let I'm gonna let you start, and I want to start off with what are some unwritten rules of networking in general that we know that we should never break. So these, I'm not talking about the rules that like it's like, oh yeah, this is a rule, but I'll break it if X, Y, and Z happens, or if this aligns, or I want to know in networking in general, what is the one thing, the one rule that you know that you should never break?
One rule that you should never break: um, deploying something without testing it.
See,
Is that not a good networking rule?
well, now when you say testing it, what do you mean by testing it?
Well, so if you're going to deploy, I'd say any type of solution out, like either in mass or let's say it could be something as simple as a feature or a firmware. That should be tested definitely before you put it in production.
So how much testing are we talking? Because look, let's be honest. There's a reason why the saying is everybody has a test network. And sometimes that test network is separate than the production network.
Yeah, and I'll say there's probably a lot of people that would probably say they don't have a test network in their
Oh,
test network, their production network. Um, and I think that's probably where I'm kind of looking at it is like if you were going to enable something, and a lot of this I kind of think back on situations where people have enabled something or did something, and it was very like you ask them like, hey, what happened? Like, what did you do? What happened around this time? Did y'all make any changes or something like that? And this happens all the time, right? And it's not any knock on anybody, but someone can say, well, no, I didn't. And then at the very, very end of the day, we're like, okay, I actually did make a change, but I didn't think it was important, right? I didn't think it was necessary. And so there's loads of stories behind that. But that's what I would say. If you're gonna enable something, make sure to definitely document it. Make sure, of course, to have some type of test, whether it be a small test, right? Of hey, we're going to test out this feature, and then kind of understand how that feature will scale. And it's really easy on name the solutions out there. There's a checkbox there inside of that solution that could probably cause some problems for you, right? So um, this I feel like this is a story or a necessary situation that happens to me at least once every other week, or I encounter it, just in the wild, right?
right.
Yeah.
So it's funny because I'm going to give you my answer,
Okay.
and my answer is rooted in what you just said, which is making me I'm laughing so much on the inside. Is don't ever enable something unless you know what it is you're doing. So
Yeah.
and I have a fantastic story that I can now tell on myself. Is in my previous job, I was deploying a network, and I had two DHCP servers, and the default was the two DHCP servers would sync the DHCP tables across themselves in an HA type fashion once every second. And the default was is they synced it over multicast. And so I didn't know to not check that. So I did. And then for 9 months, they couldn't figure out why our brand new data center would have these slowdowns when we would hit peak traffic on the Wi Fi network. Because, I was doing, this is a network at the airport, so it was a high turnover. So I had lots of DHCPs that were coming in, and my average duration was like 20 minutes on the network, and then they were gone forever, and we'd never see them again.
Yeah.
And so what I figured out was I was like, wow, I was like, the slowdown graph in the data center really resembles the client load on the Wi-Fi network. So I went to our architect, and I was like, does this little multicast checkbox, syncing my two servers together across the entire data center? I was like, could that cause the slowdowns? And he said some words that I cannot repeat on a family show. And then he said, will you please change that immediately? And we solved a 9-month problem. So,
Yeah. No, I've had very similar situations as well. The one thing that's like called in my head about like, hey, don't deploy without testing, right? There's two scenarios that pop up. One was an environment that one day somebody just said, I'm going to enable meshing in the environment. And they did it. And they had someone cut a whole bunch of fiber, they repaired it, and vice versa. And then the entire network was just looped up. And I walked in and I said, what's going on with this? Like, how did this occur? And you start kind of combing through admin logs and stuff, and you're like, oh, meshing got enabled. Like, why did you do this? Oh, we needed to mesh two APs together. I was like, but you enabled it everywhere. And so you have buildings meshing with other buildings, and you're fighting with, this solution or design that wasn't actually tested out properly, like even on the switched network as well. Like there's a lot of things that can go wrong there. Spanning tree, you got to look at it all. And then the other, there's been multiple occasions where, I feel like this automated world that we live in, like where we can just, hey, click a button to upgrade and kind of go from there. Like that actually might be hurting us a lot more because you have, like, I've had groups where like they'd upgrade like tens of thousands of APs at once and just do it overnight. And I'm like, be careful. How long did you test? How long did you let that bake in? And it that's a major concern, right? You don't ever want to do anything that's going to be impacting, especially at that large of scale. And but yeah, something as simple as, oh, we just changed it to a different version of firmware or something, and yeah, it can cause issues. So you have to test, you have to I guess do all these things that I was taught to, and I sometimes think that the world is kind of moving into that point and click way of doing things.
Yeah, I was at an event years ago, and when this first started coming up with the whole, oh, you just click here and it does everything, and I can't even take credit for it. I don't even remember who to give credit to at this point. But the other person said, yeah, he said, what was it? One click to rule them all, one click to crash them all, and like that is always stuck in my head with that whole, like, oh, just this one single click and it does everything, and you're just like, it, yes, it will do everything, good, bad, it'll do it all.
Um, I can say one thing that I deal with a lot in MDU is people enabling the Uni 2, the DFS channels. And we have a lot of that problem, more or less, that it enables. You have outages occur, you have issues and situations that occur, and they don't understand why that occurred, right? Like, what is this DFS thing that's here, and why is it affecting me? Why is it affecting this only one property? And that can go into a lot more, into the sense of best practices, right? Properly surveying sites and stuff like that. But it can become difficult, right? If you're trying to watch for DFS events and things like that. I think sometimes before doing deployment. So I do understand where people can get a little bit frustrated.
All right, so I want to switch real quick. So we talked about things, some of these rules, but what are rules that you tell people, and then you find yourself occasionally going back and breaking, and you're just like, rules like, I'll tell you mine. I have two of them. Never deploy a wireless mesh network, and I've now proposed that twice in the past 4 months. And then the other one is mounting like ceiling mounted APs on the wall like a clock. And I proposed that, I think, 3 times in the past 4 months, even though that is a rule. And I'm like, but I'm going to break my rule.
Um, I have those two rules, and I have broken both of those rules. Wall-mounted APs, omnidirectional APs like that are supposedly for ceiling mounts, right?
Yeah.
And I have definitely seen people mount H series APs, hospitality driven APs to ceilings, and I've seen them hanging down out of the ceilings. And you just stare. I probably have some pictures like of some, just like you just stared at it. Who did this? Like, but I would say between those, hallway designs are probably a pet peeve where people still just stick APs down the hallway, don't actually. But you kind of, sometimes you can't. You have to contend with the physical cabling that's at the
Yeah.
property. And I tend to take a step back and say, okay, what's the use case, right? What are we doing here? We're trying to offer public Wi-Fi. We're trying to offer residential Wi-Fi. I was like, okay, if you're going to do this, you need to be very, very careful with your SLAs. But if you're going to ask me, hey, Aaron, when's the time where you would just be comfortable doing like those types of designs? Physical cabling restrictions, and maybe for just IoT. Like, I don't want to do anything I can really, like, I don't want my APs to have that much line of sight down a hallway together, called the Wi-Fi tunnel.
Yeah. Now my, AP on the, now I haven't gone into the mount the wall plate on the ceiling,
Yeah.
although I do remember I was consulting on somebody and I was like, well, because he's like, it's the only AP. This was back when we had the supply chain stuff. And it
Yeah.
was like the only AP they could get their hands on for this deployment was an H series. And they were like, well, what would happen? And I was like, well, let's model it up and see. So because when I put the AP on the wall like a clock, it's because I was actually trying to go vertically in a townhome. And so it wasn't very wide.
Yeah.
And but I had a cabling restriction up on the upper floors. And so I was like, so, so the way I did it is I had an H series on the wall on the first floor. And then I had an R series on the wall on the second and the third floor, because then I could cover, the first floor I could only go wall. So I was like, okay, we're gonna put a wall plate here. And I was like, but then let's go like this, like in the back of the townhouse, and I'm gonna cover up in this area. And I was like, that would actually work.
I've done that exact design before, the duplex driven like townhomes.
Yeah.
Floor. Yeah. Trying to figure out which exact one, what'll work better. Speaking of that, even during supply chain, you saw a lot of people, again, they had H series as well. And there was a lot of kind of discussions in MDU about how to actually deploy the H series in MDU, because typically I think what you see in hospitality is the AP is typically behind an AP, behind a TV or a desk or something. And then you have this entire room and then there's another one. Well, H series back to back. Don't do that. That's like two APs stepping on each other and having a very, very bad time. And so that relocation can be very, very costly, right? And I'm not going to tell you to enable mesh when you move the AP, but I guarantee you somebody probably would out there, but just don't do it. Like, don't cause one more problem, or don't replace one problem for another problem.
I was actually just talking to my boss earlier today about that, about the, so this is, I don't know if this is a rule. I don't know what it is, but I've started to institute it, which is never rush to failure. It's like, and the philosophy behind that is we're going to make mistakes. We're going to do some of these bad things. It's like, but before you do it, just take a second and I even had a call last week with a customer, and, they came to us last year and said, hey, we want to do this network. And we said, cool, we did a design, and then like their funding, something happened, the project. And then they came back to us a couple weeks ago and said, hey, we want to do this. So we're like, man, this has been a year. And my only question to them was, can you just confirm that the requirements haven't changed? That was my only question to them, and they were like, well, why would they have changed? And I was like, well, it's been a year. And I was like, and the last thing I want to do is ship you a bunch of gear based on what the requirements were 12 months ago, only to have the installer show up and staring at a pile of gear. And the customer's like, that's not what we wanted at all. And so, that's one of my things is like, just take a second. We have the time. It might not feel like it, but it's like, it's so costly if you don't take that day or 2 days at the beginning and say, hey, let's just stop for just a second and figure out what happens if we do put two APs back to back, in that scenario. I had another one where they decided to upgrade the APs and they started pulling more power from the switch. The switch ran out of PoE. So then they decided to just hard cap the PoE budget out of the switch.
I've done that multiple times. I have starved APs of power where they've kernel panicked.
Yeah, and it was like, well, then the AP goes into the degraded power mode because it's like, I don't have AT power. I only have AF power, and then they couldn't figure out why the coverage was bad. And it's like, well, you designed thinking you were going to get one value out of the AP, and they're like, but we configured it to be max power. And it's like, yeah, but it's max power of the AF.
So I can tell you the fun of doing that exact situation, but maybe a little bit worse. So you can hard set the power on the APs, right? You can hard set them up, and basically you're saying, hey, you're getting enough power, AP. Trust me. That's what it is. But if you go back and then you hard set it on the back end port as well, the AP doesn't know it's not going to get enough power. So sooner or later, when you get load on it, it's going to spike. And I've talked to hardware engineers. They're like, what? Yeah, like the AP is now starved. and so you'd have APs rebooting. You'd have them power. Like, what's happening here? Just because they got just enough load on them to exceed that power draw that even when I was testing, right, it was fine. And then you encounter it in the wild, you encounter it in the field. And there are going to be things you can't test, right, under load in certain situations. But Yeah, that was one that I had a little bit of egg on my face for that one. So
I got to think about that one because that really is, you know, that is that is an end. And it's funny. We were probably talking to the same PLM or hardware guys about this, um, because they would come to me and they're like, "Why would you ever do that?"
yeah,
And I always tell people, I'm like, I'm like, we complain about customers a lot. We complain about this stuff, but in reality, they come up with problems that require some really weird rule breaking solutions because we would never ever ever come up with that problem on our own. Like we would never, like we wouldn't even go down that road, and yet the customers come to us and they go, oh, we're so far down this road we can't come back. What do? How do you solve that problem? And so it's like, okay, we're
I think of it in the sense that, especially, I always say anybody from like the South, the scrappers, like we have to figure out how to get things done with no money whatsoever. And uh, I feel like that happens a lot. And then you have to figure out how to make something work, right? Like what I was telling you on the switching, like we were trying to do that because we were out of power. We needed to figure out how to bucket a problem that was a problem caused by someone else, probably human error, right? At the point
yeah.
of ordering or selecting the proper switch or doing the port count design and the POE budget. So you have to do that, and then I think sometimes you go to some of the hardware engineers and even some of the product leadership, and like, what have y'all done? How did you do that, and why did you do that? And sometimes there's not some great technical answer behind it. Sometimes it's just people, but um, like that exact same perspective like has led me to learn a lot more. There's one thing that I always think about is like I think I was at Black Hat with you, and I was arguing with somebody over the different types of optics you could use over different types of fiber. And this gentleman argued with me like, and I felt the same way he did at a time, but he argued with me that you could never use an LX optic over multi-mode fiber. And you say you can't do it. You can't do it. And I said, yes, it'll work. It'll work at certain distances, even though it's against the standard. But this will work in a pinch.
It won't work well,
It
but
won't work well, but it'll work in a pinch for a short distance, right? And that's what we needed.
right.
And the reason that I knew about this is because I encountered a gas pump on a boat dock one time with an LX optic plugged into it with multi-mode, no launch cables, no nothing. And I was
Mhm.
like, how is this working? And I started thinking about it, and it's like, well, 62.5 micron versus a 9 micron. And you start kind of logically putting it together, and you're like, yeah, that'll work, even though
It's
nobody tells you should ever do that. So in a pinch, I have I would carry LX optics instead of SXs, like as far as my go bag, right?
right.
Because I could get something working, not probably not the best, but in a pinch or an emergency, that'll make the difference, I think, for customers.
And so this is what I love having these conversations is because it's when you get into these situations where it's like, oh, you should never do this, and we're like, well, yes, but if the difference is throw in an LX optic so you can go back and get a drink,
Yeah.
or not get the service up and then you're still fighting it for another, you break the rule.
Well, I think and two, this definitely depends on your leadership sometimes, like your management and how they want to look at things, right? But providing some level of degraded service to get some service recovery, like a lot of people would be okay with that, right? So I'd rather have degraded service. They know it's degraded, but that's me. Some other people may say, no, we need to get it fixed the right way. I think the way I would say that is don't do these things on greenfield deployments, brownfield deployments. If you have to do them in a pickle or a pinch, excuse me, to get to get
Yeah.
to that next level where you can get the replacement in the next day, right? Like the optics coming in or something, the AP's coming in, but we gotta, put up this, edit to 11N AP temporarily because they won't hush. Yeah, like, but be careful.
Well, but I mean, I think it also goes back to understanding, what is your use case? I mean,
Yeah,
in some instances, like, yeah, it's going to run degraded, but what do you actually need?
yeah.
Especially with like gas wells and stuff like that. I mean, it's not like they're pumping 10 gigs.
No, that's a good point too, because like the entire I feel like the networking world has moved and rushed towards 10 gig, right? You have all these
Right.
10 you have 10 gig links that are out there. Could that service still operate on a 1 gig link? Um, possibly. And so that could be an alternate, option for you. And no, I like kind of I'm kind of that guy that has that ABCD plan. Like I have in my head, if
Right.
this fails, then it's got to go here. And if this fails, it's got to go here. And yeah,
That's actually because I have that too, and I never really thought about it. But anytime I see a network, anytime I design a network, I always have sort of that, you know, and I've never really thought about having sort of that break fix plan in your head of saying, how could I punt? How could I change? How could I do something different if for whatever reason, you know, it all breaks or something breaks or, it doesn't show up. You have the one piece doesn't show up. But I've never really thought about that. But that's a good point. Always have that break fix, redundancy plan in your head.
that's a troubleshooter's mentality. Like
Yes.
that's all I ever wanted to be, was just a troubleshooter. The design and stuff's cool, but I've always looked at the point of I can put these APs in, I can put these switches, these routers, and this design in. Um, that equipment will be swapped out. But if I design a good network and I design a good like that layout
Yeah.
will be there, that design will be there, and so that's how I've looked at it. But every outage, every maintenance window, like anytime I've ever cut over a network, I've always had like two or three plans to punt back to a point where, I remember I was cutting over a data center at one time and we were cutting between two different types of gear. And there was a problem with this other vendor's gear. I won't name names or whatever. And I said, okay, well, we can roll everything back. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I said, I want you to go unplug the power cables from every single switch that you have there and plug them back in, and then everything restored. They're like, how did you do that? And I said, it's called not writing your changes, or not saving your changes, or writing them before you're ready. And a little basic thing like that versus everybody now having to go back in and scramble into all this equipment to do everything that you've done or messed up, and might not get everything back either. Like,
I used
yeah,
to I used to tell my bosses because they, at one point our change advisory board got a little out of hand, and and they're like,
they
well,
usually do.
yeah, well, I mean, not as an individual call, but as like the board in and of itself had gotten a little too full of itself, and like having your primary plan and then a rollback plan and then like a tertiary, that wasn't good enough for them. They're like, well, what happens if the whole world ends, or what happen? And it's like at a certain point, I'm like we can cover 98% of all the possibilities, but to try to cover this last 2% to make the change advisory board happy, I was like, we're just wasting our time. Just have a little bit of faith in me as in my ability to troubleshoot, to have the reload in command, you know,
Yeah.
to where like, and you just don't save it. So yeah, reload in, and it reboots on its own, and then you have to remember to go in and cancel that if you make it if you're good. But
No, I think I you're trying to mitigate risk, right? You're trying to do everything you can to mitigate it, but there are going to be situations that you aren't going to be able to control, like instances if certain services go down. Like there's been major internet outages that have affected the entire U.S., the world, right? Um, that's you can try all day long to kind of work around it, but if fiber gets cut and fiber gets cut everywhere, or multiple places, you have a bad time, right?
yeah,
Yeah. So
I mean, unfortunately, I'd love to go on because I love talking to you about all this stuff, and this is kind of fun. But um, we're out of time. So what I want to do is I'm going to give you one last chance to sort of summarize your thought on breaking rules.
the rules and the structures are there for a reason. Um, if you have to break them, only break them in a temporary manner and understand the full fix, like what you should be doing. And if you don't know, ask. There's nothing wrong with not knowing, but there could be something wrong with putting a network in that's going to break like right after you
You,
leave.
you, you know what? I cannot top that. That is that is fantastic wisdom, and I'm glad I'm recording this because now I can go back and listen to it. But I can't top that, so I'm not even going to try, man. Like that
Uh,
is, Dude, that is years. And for everybody listening, that is just years of wisdom. That is years of somebody who's just saying, like, look, one, don't be afraid to ask. I cannot. That is such an amazing thing, Aaron. Because what you don't know can really hurt you. So ask. If you don't know, ask, and slow things down. And so, Aaron, thank you for joining us.
Sure.
If you want to get a hold of Aaron, how would people get a hold of you?
You can usually yell at your Ruckus salespeople and just scream, "Give me the MDU team," and then I'm going to wind up popping up like some genie. But just reach out to your Ruckus reps and say you want to talk to the MDU team, or if there's anything we can help you with. Like, I'm around. I'm on LinkedIn too.
Yeah.
I think my title on LinkedIn is like aspiring retiree. So,
that's fair. But hey, thanks for joining us, and it's been fun, and luckily I get to talk to you again whenever I want. So for everybody else, sure. I will catch you on the next episode. Hey there, thanks for listening. If you like the show and haven't done so, please like and subscribe. If you want to contact the show directly, you can email us at ruckcast@comscope.com. I do read those emails. To learn more about any Ruckus products or services that we've talked about on this or any other prior podcast, please check out our About section of the show or the show notes. And as always, thank you for listening.